If you're thinking about using Fiverr or Upwork for your product design, I'm not going to tell you it's a bad idea. I'm going to show you the math because most inventors who hire a $30 an hour freelancer end up spending 2 to 3 times more than clients who hire a senior engineer at a much higher hourly rate. That sounds backward, but it's true. Junior designers design for a function. Senior engineers design for manufacturing. And that one difference can quietly add $10, $15, sometimes $20 per unit to your production cost. Now multiply that by 10,000 units. Who actually paid more? That is the part almost nobody sees until it's too late. And once you see it, you will never look at a cheap hourly rate the same way again. Point one, the pattern I see every single week. This is one of the most common patterns I see. A client comes to us after already working with somebody else. Usually they have a CAD file. Sometimes they have a 3D printed prototype. Almost always they have a factory quote that just destroyed the business model. Now let me be clear. The freelancer usually was not dishonest. They often delivered exactly what they knew how to deliver. The files may look clean. The design may look polished. They may have great reviews. They may have delivered on time. That is not the problem. The problem is not the person. The problem is what that person fundamentally cannot see. Most junior designers are trained to optimize for one thing. Does the client like it? Does it function? Does it look right on the screen? Does the prototype seem to work? But they're usually not trained deeply in manufacturability. They're not trained in tolerance stackups. They're not trained in the material behavior. They're not trained in wall thickness strategy. They're not trained in assembly efficiency. And they're not trained in what happens when a factory tries to run that design at 5,000 units, 10,000 units, or more. That is where everything changes. Because when that file hits a real factory, one of two things usually happens. Either the design gets rejected outright, or the quote comes back so high that the product can no longer be sold profitably. And when that happens, you do not need a tweak. You need a redesign. Now you're paying someone to undo bad decisions, rebuild the file correctly, and fix problems that never should have existed in the first place. And while all that is happening, the clock is burning. Weeks turn to months. Momentum disappears. Confidence drops. And the money you thought you saved up front gets burned under the cost of fixing what was invisible on day one. That is the trap. The mistake is not hiring a freelancer. The mistake is not knowing what a freelancer fundamentally cannot see. That blind spot has a price tag. Point two, the math nobody does before they hire. Most inventors make one comparison before hiring: hourly rate. That is the wrong comparison. And it's why the real cost always comes as a shock. Because the correct comparison is not hourly rate. The correct comparison is total project cost plus downstream unit economics. Let's say you hire a low-cost freelancer and spend $800 to $2,000 on CAD. Sounds efficient, sounds lean, sounds smart until the factory rejects it. Now the redesign costs $5,000, $10,000, maybe $15,000, but that's not even the real damage. The real damage is when poor DFM, which stands for Design for Manufacturability, decisions are baked into the CAD from the beginning. Because bad decisions in wall thickness, part count, material choice, tolerances, and assembly methods do not just create engineering problems. They create margin problems. That bad file can quietly add $8, $10, $15 extra per unit in manufacturing costs. Now take $10 extra per unit across 10,000 units. That's $100,000 gone. Gone because of decisions the inventor did not even know were being made inside the file. That is why this keeps happening. Junior designers design for function. Senior engineers design for manufacturability. They think about how the part will mold, how it will shrink, how it will assemble, how it will survive use, how it will affect tooling, how it will affect assembly labor, how it will affect unit cost at scale. Those decisions get locked into the CAD file on day one. And once they're locked in, they are expensive to undo. I call this the seesaw effect. Choose the wrong manufacturing process at the wrong stage, and every downstream cost gets heavier. Tooling goes up, unit cost goes up, assembly complexity goes up, time goes up, and risk goes up. So that cheap hourly rate, it was never the real number. The real number was always the total cost, every decision baked into the file. And that is why I say this all the time. You're not paying more for a senior engineer. You're paying less because you're buying the elimination of mistakes that compound from that moment forward. That is what real expertise does. It collapses risk, it protects margin, and it keeps you from paying extra to the factory later. If you're watching this and you already have a file, a prototype, or a factory quote that does not make sense, do not guess your way forward. Book a free strategy session with me. I will look at exactly where you are, tell you what is working, what is not, and what the smartest next step is before you spend another dollar. The link is in the description. It takes 2 minutes to fill out. Let's make sure you're not sitting on a problem you do not know about. Point 3, what Fiverr can never give you at the prototype stage. Now let's talk about the prototype stage, because this is where bad upstream decisions explode. Most inventors treat the prototype stage as confirmation that the design works. But in reality, this is where hidden mistakes detonate. And once you reach this stage, the cost of those mistakes is no longer a redesign fee. Now it becomes a tooling investment. That is a completely different level of pain. A 3D printed prototype built from a bad file gives false confidence. Why? Because 3D printing materials behave very different from real production materials. There's different strength, different flexibility, different tolerances, different surface behavior, and different assembly behavior. So something that works beautifully in a printed prototype may fail completely when it is molded, machined, or assembled in real production conditions. And that is where inventors get crushed. Because once you approve that prototype and commit to tooling, you're no longer risking a few hundred or a few $1,000s. You may be risking $20,000 to $50,000 in tooling. And if the production parts do not fit, do not perform, or cannot be assembled efficiently at scale, you are not fixing a file anymore. You are scrapping an investment and restarting a timeline that may already be 6 to 12 months behind. That is brutal. Why at Rabbit, we prefer production grade validation. We machine prototypes from production grade materials specifically to close that gap. What gets approved should behave like what comes off a factory floor. Not fantasy, no false confidence, no nasty surprise when the real parts arrive. And just as important, the same senior engineer who designed the file supports the prototype and supports the path into production. No handoff, no information loss, no version of that is not what I designed when the parts show up and something goes wrong. That continuity matters more than most inventors realize, because product development is not just about creating a file. It's about owning the chain of decisions from design to prototype to manufacturing. That is the one thing a freelancer marketplace cannot replicate at any price. A prototype should eliminate risk, not create a more expensive version of it. And the material your prototype is built from determines whether you're validating reality or paying to validate a fantasy. So here's the truth. The cheap option was never cheap. It was just a payment plan for mistakes. Mistakes that do not show up on the invoice. They show up at the factory. They show up in the unit cost. They show up in the tooling quote you were not expecting. They show up in the redesign you never planned for. They show up in the months you lose trying to recover. The inventors who win do not ask who is cheapest. They ask who has done this before, who understands manufacturing, who sees the whole process, who can help me make decisions that protect my margin before I get too far in. Because you're going to pay for experience either way. The only question is, do you want to pay for it up front or you want to pay for it later in mistakes you never saw coming? That is the decision. And for most inventors, that decision determines whether the product ever makes it to market. If this video made you rethink your current plan, that is a good thing. The inventors who catch this early save tens of thousands, the ones who do not find out at the factory. So here is what I want you to do right now. Click the link in the description and book a free strategy session with me. We will look at your product, your budget, and your timeline, and I will give you a straight answer on exactly what to do next. No pitch, no pressure. If I cannot help you, I will tell you. And when you're done, watch this video next. It goes deeper on why one senior engineer beats 5 specialists every time, and why that decision can determine whether your product ever makes it to market. The links for both are in the description. I will see you there.